Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
You know that moment when the world doesn't shatter with some big explosion, no screams, no slamming doors, but instead it cracks in absolute silence like a thin line slowly running across glass? For me, it was a Tuesday morning, a week before graduation, when I stood in the kitchen holding a letter in my hand that still smelled like printer toner and fresh disappointment. I was named valedictorian, top of my class, the only one in the department to maintain a perfect GPA while juggling two part-time jobs, tutoring underclassmen, and basically duct taping my sanity together for 4 years. I dreamed of that moment not for the applause, not for the stupid sash or the diploma, but because I thought, for just once, they'd look at me like I mattered as much as my sister Sarah. I thought my dad, who always said he valued grit over grades, would at least say something like, "Proud of you, kid." I thought my mom, who spent more time choosing throw pillows than talking to me, would finally say the words every daughter quietly aches to hear. "You did good, honey." Instead, I got a half smile and a shrug. "We'll skip your ceremony," Dad said, not even looking up from the eggs he was burning on the stove. "You know we're not into all that speechy crap." Speechy crap. That's what he called the culmination of 4 years of sweat, anxiety, and sleepless nights. I felt my fingers crinkle the letter slightly, the corners of it curling under my palm, like it was trying to protect itself from the moment. My mom chimed in from across the room, not even glancing in my direction, as she scrolled on her phone, probably looking at engagement rings with Sarah. "We'll take you out to dinner instead, okay? Something casual, just us." Just us. The three words that always meant them and Sarah and me sitting at the edge of the table trying to scrape together crumbs of attention. I nodded like a robot, gave a small practiced smile, and tucked the letter under a pile of coupons on the counter, because that's what you do when you grow up in a house that runs on selective love and calculated warmth. You learn to package your pain neatly and tuck it where no one will trip over it. It's not like this came out of nowhere. If I'm honest, the pattern had always been there. Sarah, the golden child, with her wide smile and Instagram-perfect life, always seemed to exist in high definition while I was stuck in black and white. She flunked her freshman year, dropped out of college entirely, bounced from job to job, and yet somehow she was the one Mom referred to as resilient. Meanwhile, I was the one folding laundry, getting my own rides to SAT prep, and quietly excelling just to be met with polite indifference. Growing up in our house meant that love came with footnotes. You were praised if you shined in the ways they approved of. Sarah's ways: beauty, charm, the ability to make people laugh even when she didn't mean a word of it. Me? I was the one with nosebleeds from late-night study marathons, the one who skipped dances to finish group projects alone, the one who did everything right just to be told, "Don't rub it in your sister's face." So when Dad brushed off my speech like it was a PTA bake sale, I didn't cry. I just stored it, like all the other little cuts, small and invisible until they pile up into something too heavy to carry without it sinking your chest. I went back to my room and stared at the speech I'd already started writing. It wasn't flowery or dramatic. It was real, honest. I'd planned to thank the faculty who stuck by me, the friends who became my family, and of course, my parents, back when I still believed they'd be there, maybe even tear up a little, maybe say, "You proved us wrong in the best way." But that night, I reread it, and all the words suddenly felt like lies. The next few days blurred into each other: classes, finals, the occasional congratulations from classmates who still thought valedictorian meant something to my family. At night, I'd hear Mom talking to Sarah on speakerphone about Sarah's new boyfriend, some guy named Ethan who had a boat and a Tesla, and according to Mom, big plans. Meanwhile, my big plan was trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice long enough to survive dinner. Then came Sunday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my calendar, when I saw the graduation ceremony reminder pop up. I sighed and glanced across the table, where Dad was typing something into his phone. His face was smug in that way he gets when he thinks he's being clever, like when he lies to telemarketers for fun or argues with baristas about the price of a cappuccino. That smugness should have tipped me off. But it wasn't until he stepped out to take a call that he left his phone face up on the table, and the screen lit up with a message from Sarah. It read, "Looking forward to brunch. I booked the rooftop spot you love. Bring Mom." Below it, Dad's reply, "Sounds perfect. We'll grab brunch with Sarah, skip the whole ceremony thing." There it was, written in pixels and sealed in my stomach like a stone. They weren't skipping my ceremony because they weren't into all that. They were skipping it because they had better plans. They weren't disinterested. They were deliberately choosing something else. Someone else. I didn't move. I didn't scream or throw his phone across the room. I just stared at the message like it was a map to my childhood. And suddenly every road led to the same dead end. For the first time, I stopped making excuses for them. And right then I knew I would still walk across that stage. I would still deliver that speech, but I'd be thanking people for showing up. And I would mean every word of it, even if it was just me and an empty row where they should have been. The morning of graduation arrived with the kind of blue sky that seemed to mock anyone expecting the day to go wrong, as if the weather itself had conspired with every smiling face on campus to paint the illusion of perfection, to dress up disappointment in sunlight and warmth, and convince you to smile through clenched teeth and swollen silence. I woke up early, not because I was excited, but because sleep had become something like a distant memory, something I used to do when my heart wasn't so heavy and my thoughts didn't spiral the second my head hit the pillow. The night before, I'd laid out my robe, the deep maroon fabric still stiff from being pressed at the dry cleaners, the cap with the tassel hanging just off the edge of my mirror, and I'd looked at my reflection the way someone stares at a stranger who looks vaguely familiar, wondering if maybe they'd known each other in another life. I kept imagining that maybe they would change their minds at the last minute, that maybe Dad would show up in his worn-out navy blazer, the one he always wore to church on holidays, and Mom would pretend to hate the heat, but secretly enjoy seeing my name called, seeing her daughter do something worthy of a framed photo for once. But that fantasy crumbled the minute I saw Sarah's Instagram story around 9:45 in the morning, just as I was lining up backstage in my cap and gown, heart pounding like a damn bass drum. There she was, Sarah, my sister, in her floral dress with the neckline that always made Mom say she looked fresh and classy, sitting at a rooftop bar in downtown Los Angeles, one of those trendy places with overpriced cocktails served in jam jars and avocado toast that costs more than most people's grocery budget for the week. The camera panned over the table, capturing a mimosa being poured, catching Dad mid-laugh with his sunglasses on, and Mom raising a glass like they were toasting to a future that didn't have room for me. The caption under the clip read, "Brunchin' with the best." I watched it on loop, my thumb frozen above the screen, while my stomach twisted itself into a knot so tight I thought I'd be sick before I could even take the stage. I should have felt angry. I should have wanted to scream, to throw my phone against the concrete, to walk away and leave the ceremony behind like they had. But what I felt wasn't rage. It was worse. It was a hollow, dull ache, the kind that doesn't scream. It just settles into your bones and reminds you over and over again that you were never really in the running to be someone's priority. I hadn't lost them in that moment. I'd just finally seen the truth of what had been there all along. They weren't bad people, not in the traditional sense. They paid bills, they smiled at the neighbors. They called Sarah every week and asked about her stupid dog like it was a grandchild. But when it came to me, they simply chose not to see. As I sat backstage, surrounded by the low hum of other graduates talking, adjusting gowns, fixing their hair, I pulled out my speech, the same one I'd rewritten the night before after staring at Dad's message to Sarah for 2 hours in a numb haze. I'd scratched out all the thank yous that felt fake. I'd stripped it down to the bones, to what mattered. No more pretending that I owed my parents some public gratitude they hadn't earned. No more smiling through the insult of absence. A student volunteer popped her head around the curtain and called my name, asking me to line up because I'd be going last. Valedictorian. The title still tasted weird in my mouth, like it didn't belong to me, or like maybe it meant nothing if the people you most wanted to hear it couldn't be bothered to care. I nodded, stood up, adjusted my gown, and joined the line. I stared straight ahead as we moved forward, one name at a time, applause echoing into the sky, until I stood just behind the curtain, minutes away from stepping into the spotlight alone. I checked my phone one last time. Another Instagram story from Sarah. This time they were holding hands across the table, 3 champagne flutes mid-toast, a caption that said, "So proud of this family, couldn't ask for more." The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed, but the sound got stuck somewhere between my ribs. I looked up, took a breath, and stepped out. The sun was high, casting a white heat over the stage, and the sea of faces in front of me blurred slightly as I approached the podium. Somewhere out there were professors who had pulled me through panic attacks and exam meltdowns, classmates who had become accidental friends, people who didn't owe me anything but had shown up anyway. And somewhere, in a rooftop bar with string lights and artisanal brunch, were the people who had promised me that family meant something solid, and then vanished when it was inconvenient. I stood at the podium, fingers wrapped around the edges like I might float away if I didn't hold tight. The crowd quieted. I opened my speech and started to speak, my voice steady, stronger than I felt. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking the people who got me here. The mentors, the late-night coffee run partners, the classmates who shared notes and support when I needed it most. I paused, looked out at the crowd, and felt that familiar emptiness tug at my chest. And most of all, I want to thank everyone who showed up today. Your presence means more than words, and to those who didn't, well, I hope the brunch was worth it. A slow wave of murmurs rippled through the audience, and then silence again, followed by a single laugh somewhere near the back. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I just closed my folder, nodded once, and walked off the stage like I had nothing left to lose. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't. And they still hadn't even texted. Walking off that stage felt less like a victory lap and more like stepping out of a burning building, calm on the surface, but scorched underneath, as though the very air I moved through carried the residue of every silent dismissal, every ignored achievement, every time I smiled through their absence just to keep from looking like a child desperate for attention. The applause was still echoing behind me, a surreal mixture of confused chuckles, stunned silence, and a few whistles from students who clearly caught the subtext and knew exactly what I'd just done. And though I tried to carry myself with that rehearsed grace, with shoulders squared and spine straight, something inside me was trembling, not with regret or fear, but with the raw, undeniable awareness that I had crossed a line I couldn't step back from, and I didn't want to. I didn't even bother checking my phone right away. I knew that clip, those few words, delivered with that deliberately cool detachment, had already taken flight into the world, carried by the same classmates who loved nothing more than a good viral moment, especially when it had the taste of family drama and public reckoning. And part of me, the part that had spent too many years biting her tongue to keep the peace, was waiting, bracing for that inevitable call or text or guilt-laced message from Mom. Maybe a passive-aggressive, "Couldn't you have just talked to us first?" or Dad's favorite, "You made us look bad." But none of that came right away, which somehow made it worse, because the silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud, stretched tight like a wire waiting to snap. By the time I got back to my apartment, still in my robe with my heels dangling from one hand and my speech folder under the other arm, my phone had exploded with notifications. Not from my family, but from people I barely knew. Old classmates, distant cousins, mutuals from college who hadn't spoken to me in months, but now had something to say. Screenshots, reposts, texts like, "Damn, that was cold," and "You said what needed to be said." Someone had clipped the last 10 seconds of my speech and posted it on TikTok with the caption, "When your parents bail on your graduation for brunch." It was already at over 60,000 views, and the comments were a bloodbath of support, judgment, confusion, and way too many people saying things like, "This hit way too close to home." It wasn't just the virality that rattled me. It was the confirmation from total strangers, that what I'd felt wasn't delusion or drama or some overblown college kid tantrum. It was real. People recognized it. They saw themselves in it. And still, my phone stayed silent from the only 3 people whose voices I had half hoped, despite everything I might hear. But that silence didn't last long. By 6 that evening, the group chat I had been forcibly added to for family communication, the same one where Sarah posted photos of her rescue dog, and my parents dropped passive updates about barbecues I wasn't invited to, finally came alive. The first message was from Mom. Just one line. "Jenna, we saw your little performance. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the day, no congratulations. Just an accusation wrapped in condescension, as if I'd stood on stage and committed a crime rather than speak a truth that had festered for years." I didn't reply, not because I didn't have 1,000 things to say, but because I wanted them to stew in the silence for once. Let them guess, let them feel the distance and wonder what was coming next. Then Sarah jumped in, predictably, with all the finesse of someone who had never once considered the world from any perspective other than the one where she was the center. "Why are you trying to make this about you? You always have to turn things into drama. It's embarrassing." I laughed. Alone in my living room, still in my robe, I laughed the kind of laugh that's closer to crying than amusement, because the irony of her calling me dramatic while she played the victim from her rooftop throne was almost too much to hold. I didn't answer her either. I didn't need to. The internet had already taken care of it, because by then, someone had found Sarah's original Instagram story, the brunch clip, and reposted it under the viral video of my speech. The comment section had transformed into a battleground, with strangers dissecting the family dynamics like armchair psychologists, and while it was chaotic and occasionally cruel, it was also vindicating in a way I hadn't expected. For once, the narrative wasn't theirs to control. Later that night, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the ceremony buzz began to fade, I sat on my balcony with a warm glass of wine and the kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with your body and everything to do with your soul. I thought about all the moments that led up to this day, the missed birthdays, the ignored report cards, the years of watching Sarah be celebrated for mediocrity, while I was told not to make waves. And I thought about the words I'd said on that stage, how they hadn't been planned, hadn't been written down, but had spilled out of me like truth finally breaking through a dam. It wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about making space for the truth in a place where silence had been used like a weapon. And for once, they didn't get the last word. Not Mom with her sideways insults, not Dad with his half-hearted excuses, not Sarah with her curated brunch life nonsense. No, this time I had the mic, and I didn't drop it. I handed it back, turned my back to the crowd, and walked away, finally feeling like I had nothing left to prove. By the next morning, the ripple had become a full-blown tidal wave, the kind that pulls everything up from the ocean floor and slams it onto the shore for everyone to see. Unfiltered, ugly, impossible to ignore. And while I hadn't planned for any of this, hadn't posted the clip myself, hadn't tagged a soul or even commented on the chaos, the truth had taken on a life of its own, dragging my carefully buried family history out into the open like a storm. Dragging out the skeletons you thought you'd hidden deep enough to never be unearthed again. I woke up to over 200 unread messages, texts, DMs, missed calls, mentions, and as I sat there, still wrapped in the hoodie I'd fallen asleep in, I scrolled through it all with the numb detachment of someone watching a train wreck they started but hadn't meant to cause. Each notification another reminder that words, once spoken, don't belong to you anymore. They belong to everyone who hears them. The group chat had turned into a digital war zone, with Mom typing in long run-on messages full of capital letters and punctuation that somehow managed to sound both furious and wounded at once, as if she were more offended by the fact that I'd made the family look bad than the fact that they'd hurt me in the first place. "I just don't understand why you would air private matters in public," she wrote, her words hitting like cold stone. "It was your day. We were going to celebrate with you, but now you've made that impossible. This isn't how we raised you. And that last line, that last cold, calculated twist of the knife, that implication that they had shaped me into someone who turned on her own family, stung in a way I hadn't expected. Because it wasn't just false. It was the kind of lie that rewrote the story, to make themselves the victims of a narrative they had been too disinterested to even follow. Dad chimed in a few messages later, his tone clipped, blunt, and clearly written in one of his moods, where everything came out like a business memo, rather than a father reaching for his daughter. You humiliated us. Don't expect this to blow over. We raised you better than this. That phrase again, we raised you, as if the act of putting a roof over someone's head automatically made you a good parent. As if being biologically connected gave you the right to demand silence in the face of neglect. Sarah, of course, didn't waste any time playing the martyr, turning the whole thing into a referendum on her suffering, her embarrassment, her betrayal at the hands of the jealous little sister who couldn't just be happy for once. "Do you have any idea what you've done to Mom?" she typed. "She cried all night. She hasn't eaten. You think being the center of attention is more important than this family? You think your speech was brave? It was pathetic." The irony that she'd posted 2 more brunch photos since then, complete with cheeky captions and boomerangs of champagne toasts, wasn't lost on me. It was just another example of how effortlessly Sarah could flip the script, how she always managed to be the victim, the princess, the wounded bird in a world that always offered her soft places to land. I didn't respond, not at first. Instead, I let the messages pile up, each one more desperate, more indignant, more performative than the last. And as I read them, I began to see the pattern, not as coincidence, but as choreography. This dance they'd always done, where I was expected to play the role of the silent support system, the background character to Sarah's spotlight, the fixer of things I didn't break. I had been conditioned to think that being good meant being quiet, that loyalty meant swallowing pain, that family meant sacrificing your voice so theirs could echo louder. But now the silence was broken, and they didn't know how to handle the sound of my truth. Friends began texting too, people who had known me since high school, some who had even been to my house, who'd seen the way my parents doted on Sarah like she walked on water and treated me like the house guest who stayed too long. "I always wondered how you handled that," one girl wrote. "It was like you were invisible sometimes." Another classmate, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, messaged, "My parents skipped my graduation too. I didn't say anything. You gave people like me a voice." That part, the unexpected solidarity from strangers, from quiet observers who had long carried the same weight, I hadn't anticipated that. I hadn't expected the story to resonate beyond my own pain. Hadn't realized how many people out there had grown up in homes where love came with conditions, and acknowledgement was something you had to earn. Not something you were given simply because you existed. That night, I finally opened the group chat and stared at the string of accusations, tears, and guilt trips like it was a script from a bad family drama. I thought about replying with something sharp, something surgical that would cut through all the self-pity and denial and lay the truth bare like an open wound. But then I realized no amount of words would make them hear me if they weren't ready to listen. So instead, I sent one message, short but heavier than anything they had sent all day. I told the truth. That's more than any of you have done. And then I muted the chat. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't punishment, it was peace. Not the kind of peace you find in forgiveness, but the kind you earn by refusing to let your story be hijacked. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you finally stood up. Not just for yourself, but for every version of yourself who'd been told to sit down and smile. And somewhere, beyond the buzz of notifications, beyond the noise of a world that had finally noticed what I'd carried in secret for years, I began to feel something else. Something small but powerful. A shift. They were finally seeing me, even if they hated what they saw. Time, as I would come to learn in the weeks that followed, doesn't heal all wounds so much as it numbs them, smoothing the edges of pain into something tolerable, something you can carry without wincing every time you move. but it does nothing to erase the memory of who handed you the blade in the first place. And as the days stretched into a kind of emotionally hollow normalcy, with my family retreating into silence and the viral storm cooling into a lingering fog, I found myself facing a peculiar sort of quiet, the kind that doesn't bring comfort but instead whispers constantly that something is still unfinished, still unresolved, still hanging in the air like smoke after a fire that never really got put out. I hadn't heard a word from any of them since that last message. No calls, no apologies, not even one of those performative social media posts Mom used to make whenever she wanted to pretend everything in our family was perfect. So when a thick white envelope with Sarah's handwriting landed in my mailbox 2 months later, I stared at it for several minutes before even reaching to pick it up, unsure if I felt rage, grief, or something far more dangerous: indifference. The invitation, printed in shimmering gold script on heavy cream paper, was everything I expected: overdone, meticulously curated, and entirely self-absorbed, with phrases like, "Join us in celebrating a love that inspires," and "an intimate gathering of those who matter most," as if the past year hadn't happened, as if the emotional explosion I detonated at graduation had been a minor hiccup in an otherwise smooth family narrative. Inside the envelope, tucked between RSVP cards and directions to the vineyard estate where the ceremony would be held, was a small handwritten note from Sarah that made my stomach twist with the kind of disbelief that doesn't come from shock, but from the exhausting familiarity of someone who refuses to change even when given every chance. "Let's move on," she wrote, the letters round and cheerful. "Family first, always, hope you'll be there. Love, Sarah." No apology, no recognition, not even a line of passive regret or acknowledgement of what they had done or failed to do. Just an assumption that I would fold myself back into the role of the dutiful sister. That I would show up smiling, perhaps make a toast, maybe even pose for photos beside the woman who had watched my parents skip the most important day of my life, in favor of sipping overpriced mimosas and pretending nothing had been lost. It was as if she believed time alone had pressed some magical reset button on our relationship, as if we hadn't stood on opposite sides of a very public, very painful divide, and she was now extending an olive branch carved out of denial and tied with a bow of convenience. I sat with that invitation for a week, letting it move from my coffee table to my desk, to the corner of my nightstand like some ghost that refused to leave, until finally, one night, I took out the RSVP card, turned it over, and in clear, deliberate handwriting, wrote one word: no. No explanations, no qualifiers, no justifications. Just the answer they never expected from me. The kind that carried weight not because it was loud, but because it was final. But I wasn't done. There's a certain satisfaction in silence, in refusing to engage, in choosing not to play the game at all. But there's a different kind of satisfaction, colder and sharper, in ensuring your absence makes as much of an impact as your presence would have. So I crafted a gift, not a cruel one, not a dramatic one, but one that would sit on their pristine gift table like a quiet accusation wearing the perfect disguise. I made a donation in their names to the University Scholarship Fund for first-generation students, specifically students whose families had refused to support their education. I included a note with the receipt, folded neatly into a small silver envelope that matched the wedding's theme, and on the inside I wrote, "For those who show up when others won't." I sent it 2 weeks before the wedding, with tracking, just to be sure. On the day of Sarah's wedding, while she stood under an arch of roses reciting vows written in Pinterest poetry, I took a walk through my old campus, past the lecture halls where I'd cried in bathroom stalls after getting emails from home that made me feel like an intruder in my own life, past the library where I'd rewritten my graduation speech, past the spot behind the science building where I once screamed into the night just to feel something other than invisible. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow passing through someone else's story. I felt rooted, whole, present. not because I had won anything, but because I had stopped playing for their approval. That night, as I lay in bed with the window cracked open and the summer air drifting in like a soft reminder that life moves forward whether you're ready or not, I opened my phone, not to post, not to check views or likes, but to reread the only message that still lingered in my inbox from that week. A simple thank you from a student who had been awarded the scholarship funded in my family's name. That was the legacy I wanted. Not the viral speech, not the drama, not the bitterness, just the proof that I had survived them, and that I had turned their absence into something that might fill someone else's. In the end, the revenge wasn't about hurting them. It was about choosing myself so completely that they could no longer touch me, even when they tried. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real power looks like. Not the speech, not the silence, but the walk away.